And can I add to that, as a scientist, I would say, you know, it doesn't matter whether cows farting or humans driving cars or fossil fuels or just natural geological cycles. It doesn't matter what the causes of climate change when my mother's house goes underwater. She's at Florida, 4 feet above sea level. I don't care whether it's man-made or just a natural variation. I strongly believe that we need engineering climate management the same way. Well, think of it. When farmers are growing crops and it doesn't rain, what do? They water. That's climate management, people. They're not suggesting anything outrageous more than just being prepared to deal with and survive the natural variations of climate on this planet.
Are there any more student questions? I know you wrote them, which was really wonderful, but, and I know you've got them. This is your chance. Yeah, well, we could.
Read them out.
There they are, all right. Oh, I got a copy for you too, Kimberly.
Oh, here.
Here, it's a read off.
They were too hard. I couldn't even figure out how to answer. Oh, geez. You wanted to know about my background. Well, raised by wolves.
Ecologically minded.
How to stay hopeful about the planet's future. Yeah, well,
That's a good one for both of you.
yeah. If you lose hope, nothing else matters. So hope is a choice. That's what leaders do.
Yeah, I mean, actually, being on the game board of life would be pretty boring if there weren't challenges. I wish we hadn't created so many for our younger generations, but the whole, I mean, it's all about what you do while you're here. Like, drop everything, do anything you possibly can. I actually, when I got married, you would think that I would remember the marital vows, but what I remember was my husband and I saying, after we take care of our family, we're dedicating every single resource we have, time, energy, money, every single resource we have to making the planet better for all people.
Wow.
And what a great thing to wake up to every morning.
Wow. Any other favorite ones or anybody live?
I guess one question that's kind of salient since we're in sort of the middle of Silicon Valley. When we look at access to capital, right here we're sort of at the epicenter of access to capital for ambitious, bold, or even, say, crazy ideas. But then how come farmers throughout America struggle to access capital to modernize their farms or to switch to organic? Or like you said, people from marginalized communities still struggle to get loans that are not on exploitative terms. So then what can we do looking at the financial system to help to reverse some of those trends, especially regarding rural America?
Yeah, so venture is a huge market, growing all the time. Every year the venture funding is higher and higher, it's massive. And I'm sorry to say, in 2018, still something under 2% went to companies founded by women or people of color. So there's a massive misdistribution of capital, as you point out. And it actually really matters, because if you look at the top 10 financings of the, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be generous, but let's just say the dominant fundings, which would be the male-founded companies, they were in e-cigarettes, vaping, rideshare, and gaming. And the top 10 financings for companies founded by women, which was a much tinier number. It's a minuscule number by comparison, but nonetheless was in education, healthcare, and communications. So where capital goes really matters. We started a venture fund alongside the bank called Radical Impact Partners to try to get at, it's a small venture fund, but we're trying to build a model that disproportionately funds companies founded by women and people of color and in capital-starved areas like rural economies and the industries associated with that. And our goal is to recruit $1 billion of venture fund capital into that model over time.
You think about adding philanthropy to that, says a nonprofit.
Yeah, yeah, we do have a.
Oh, look at one more hand has gone up. Yay, thanks for the help there.
So I'm from the Midwest, I'm from Nebraska, and I do like in my town in specific, for example, like we have banks, but they are small, and so I'm wondering, like, how do you think that it will take a long time, and what do you think it will take to have the types of banks that you are focused on making and encouraging to have those happen in the Midwest,
Yeah.
where there's like you know, kind of like it was mentioned in the back, like a different mindset and also like a different set of like worries than here in California and a different set of resources. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think it's gonna take? And is that even feasible in the next like 5-10 years?
Yeah. So design thinking. So there are a network of community development banks throughout the country, some of whom might be in Nebraska. I would have to look it up. Unfortunately, there were 12,000 banks in 2006 and there are 6,000 banks now. Some of it is helpful consolidation, but a lot of it means that there are banking deserts in the country. I think the farm credit system really depends a lot on government credit enhancement, and it should, because we have to level out the risks in agriculture, particularly with climate staring down at us. We actually have proposed a new insurance product in the Farm Bill, which lo and behold, you can do that if you want to. And it would be, instead of a crop yield insurance product, which is typically what happens if you have crop yield insurance, as long as you apply what's called the National Fertilizer Recommends, which is chemical inputs purchased that you put back in the soil because it's been depleted of them, you get 85% of the yield no matter what else happens. So that's not a good incentive to building healthy soils, because it actually, when you look at soil as a vessel, it messes up its natural living system. So rather than that, we said, okay, how about if you get 85% of your yield, if you follow 6 or more of the carbon farming practices as designated by the Natural Conservation Resources Service. So those are things like no or low till, seed drilling, cover crops, composting, things like that. So why don't we de-risk the practices we actually want instead of de-risking the practices that are causing more risk in the system?
Did you see the Biggest Little Farm movie?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Biggest Little Farm, awesome.
What was the name of
Playing
that
Friday.
outfit again? The natural,
Natural Resource Conservation Service, I think I got the out of order the first time.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm thinking of the people of Nebraska.
I would like to, unless there's another burning
There's a
question.
student
Oh,
question,
great, you have a student question.
I think.
I guess like over the past several decades, wealth has become extremely concentrated, more so in like individuals and very few institutions. Has that concentration affected the way change can manage?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have egregious wealth and income disparity. I think the wealth disparity is worse. I'd be in favor, of systems. Well, let's start with this. There's a book called A Few $1,000s written by Robert Friedman, who's spent his life studying savings and the behavioral effects of savings. If a child has college savings from birth, it increases the chances that they'll actually attend college by a huge factor. If we could design a savings system where every child in the country got, say, a savings account at birth and they were allowed to invest it, not just to save it at bank rates, which are pitifully low, but to invest it, like a 529 education account. And we therefore allowed, sort of evened out the playing field a little bit, and so that people had a realistic chance of going to college debt-free or debt-reduced by the time they were 18. In a knowledge-driven economy, I think that would be huge. And I think it's politically palatable if it applies to everyone, but maybe the savings match is just very different. So socioeconomic status is one of the better parallels we have with racial, gender, or other forms of oppression. So if you are trying to get a reparations, getting money to those of the lowest socioeconomic status at a higher rate is a good thing. So if you can match savings 5 to 1, which is what Robert suggests, for the lowest socioeconomic, 1 to 1 for the highest, then we create a generation of college-ready, both behaviorally and financially, people, which would be a very good thing for all sorts of reasons. But yeah, we have to do something. That wealth concentration is terrible.
So I guess on that note, what do you think of things like universal basic income, which has kind of gotten a lot more attention recently?
Yep.
And that is in many ways another form of this kind of wealth redistribution and allows us to invest more in our communities.
Yeah. So I'm on something called the Economic Security Working Group that Chris Hughes started to look at UBI, Universal Basic Income. It's one of the sponsors of the pilot in Stockton that Mayor Tubbs is doing, $1,200 a month to, I think it's 500 families, something like that. So I believe we have to experiment in almost everything we can think of all at once, frugally, right now, figure out how we can knock some of these problems down. And so I'm very interested to see what comes of that. I think universal basic assets is more alluring to me, and that's why I mentioned the platform cooperatives. If we all have a little bit of wealth, that's actually where you get your resiliency, because it's an asset that generates income over time. If it's a fairly stable asset, then that would be good for everybody. I really believe when everybody owns a little bit of everything, we're gonna thrive. When anybody owns too much of anything, we're gonna suffer.
So I have a question about your second hat,
Yes,
farm.
yes, yes.
Yeah, so can you sort of give us just a quick summary on the lighthouse results that are coming out of that?
Yeah. So we're part of a larger network of farms and ranches experimenting with regenerative agriculture. And we're an unusual farm. We're not a livelihood ranch. We do not depend on our livelihood for the operations of the ranch. And we have overstaffed and overfunded it so that we can be engaged in all sorts of experimentation to de-risk practice for those who actually do depend on ranching for their livelihood. So we are running a number of science experiments, a life cycle analysis, a total impact measurement analysis, looking at our ability to generate 6 co-benefits. So water quality and retention, biodiversity, carbon resequestration, animal welfare, human health, and economic rural resiliency. And we've had animals on the land since 2006. We've been studying more rigorously since about 2011. The early results are that we are already making huge gains on water quality and retention, basically water infiltration, which is a very important statistic, not only for soil health, but for climate. If you think about what we have, the problem of flooding in this country is not just the massive amount of rain coming down in these superstorms, it's also that our soils are no longer capable of absorbing it. And that's where our best water storage is in the soils. Where there's water infiltration, there's likely going to be carbon resequestration as well, because that designates that there's a crystalline soil substance going on there, and that the mycorrhizal highways and the living system of the soil is upgrading. We don't have a definitive proof of across the ranch of carbon resequestration, but we have it in about 46% of the ranch in the middle of a drought with very uneven conditions across the ranch. So we don't crow about that one yet, but I think we're going to get somewhere with it. And we definitely have biodiversity of flora and fauna, leaps and bounds above what we had when we started. Economic resiliency is really, that's part of the insurance product process, is that we're going to have to get from here to there. There's very poor economic resiliency in farming communities right now. We need to get to the place where it's good, but there has to be a migration towards that. So that's why we want an insurance product and some credit enhancement products to help people travel.
Since we've got the 7 billion feet,
Yeah.
we have global partnerships active, and someone may.
We are networked with other global farmers and ranchers and organizations. And I bet you're going to say something else about, you just reminded me of a question that I should have answered. In any event, yes, it's going to be a global solution that needs to happen. So we're also investors in a lot of plant-based proteins and a lot of other, food system experiments. Yeah, it's
What's the final suggestion one or both of you have for, how to generate hope? That's where a lot of the questions for students are. What gives you hope, how to generate hope? What would you advise for these guys? They're almost at the end of their quarter year. Just how to carry this forward.
So don't wait for confidence that you can do it. A commitment is what's required. And start with a big, bold vision of the future. And go as a team. In Africa, there's a saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a team. And you just, as a leader, you have to tell stories about the future that keep people inspired enough, keep hope alive, and keep going. So I tell stories about a fabulous future. Do I believe it can happen? Do I think it's realistic? No. It takes no courage to be realistic.
Yeah, be brave. No woman is separate unto herself, that's a conversion of a John Donne poem, but we aren't separate from each other nor from nature. And if we start acting like we're not, then we'll solve all the problems.
Wow.
Suggest they go vote.
Thank you.
Go vote, yes.
And vote!
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
Vote early, vote often, today's voting day.
Thank you so much. Anyone who wants to join